Today we're going to talk about my color grading workflow and how I graded my latest short film using the Dehancer plugin. If you haven't seen that yet, go watch it first and you can come back here after. Quick backstory on this, Dehancer reached out to me a couple of weeks ago asking me to do an honest review video on their plugin. For those who don't know what Dehancer is, it's basically a film emulation software that makes your video look like film. I've been curious about this product since I've seen tons of creators who use it not only for personal content, but on professional shoots as well. Disclaimer, I'm not a professional colorist, but everything that I'm going to show you is how I like to color grade my videos and what I was able to achieve after just watching a couple of videos on how to use Dehancer. So let's get straight into it. Alright, so now we're here in my editor. I personally use DaVinci Resolve and I've switched to DaVinci Resolve about a year ago from Premiere Pro and I've been absolutely loving it since. But for those who are using other softwares, all the principles and techniques that I'm going to show you here are basically the same. So let's get straight into it. So here we got our first clip. I've shot this in S-Log3 on my FX3. And what we want to do first is convert this flat footage into Rec 709. Before that, let's head first into our project settings. And now I want to set my timeline color space into DaVinci Wide Gamut and my output color space into Rec 709A. Now the reason why I use DaVinci Wide Gamut is that I get the most color information for my editing. And the reason why I use Rec 709A as my output color space is because I'm on a Mac. And now let's proceed to converting my flat footage into Rec 709. So first of all, let's head into FX and let's add a color space transform here and label it as color space transfer or CST. And now let's add another node and add another color space transform. Label this as CST again. And let's head back to my first node. In our input color space, we're going to select Sony S Gamut 3. And then in my input gamma, Sony S-Log3 because that's what I shot it on. And in my output color space, we're going to use DaVinci Wide Gamut. And in my output gamma, DaVinci Intermediate. Now let's head on to my second node. Here we select DaVinci Wide Gamut. And input gamma, we're going to select DaVinci Intermediate. And in my output color space, we're going to select Rec 709. And for output gamma, Rec 709A. Now the reason why I use two color space transforms is so that I can retain as much information as I can while editing between these two. That's why we converted into DaVinci Wide Gamut. So what I generally like to do is all my adjustments like exposure, white balance is gonna be between these two nodes so I can have as much information as I can have to play around with. Now that we have our Rec 709 footage, before I want to add the Dehancer plugin, what I want to do first is color correct or balance my image. As we can see, my image is still a little bit warm and a little bit underexposed. So now we're gonna add a couple of nodes again. So let me move it out here. And let's add two nodes in between and label the first one as white balance and the second one as exposure. Let's go into our white balance node and adjust the white balance here in our temperature. So about here. And now let's go into our exposure node and bring up the gain. Just about like that. And now I can see that my image is still a little bit magenta. So let's go back into our white balance and pull that down a bit. And now we have a perfectly balanced image. Let me disable those two. This was our Rec 709 image. And now we've got our balanced image. And now it looks pretty good already. So what we can do now is add our Dehancer plugin. By adding another node, I've already installed my Dehancer plugin, so it should come up here. So if I type in here Dehancer, it should come up here. And now I can drag it here. And now it already applied the default settings, but it doesn't look good yet. So what I like to do first is to disable everything. So let's disable the film. Disable this, disable the print, film grain, and now we got our clean Rec 709 image again. Now in the Dehancer plugin, you can actually select your camera here through the source. Let's say I've used the FX3, Sony, FX3, and then S-Log3. But since I've already converted my footage into Rec 709, I don't actually need to do this anymore. And this is just the way I like to do it, convert it to Rec 709 and then add the Dehancer plugin. But you can also do it this way where you choose your camera and convert it to Rec 709 through here. So let's revert that to Rec 709. And now what I first want to do is select my film profile here. And now it already changed our image. As you can see here, there are tons of film profiles you can select from. I generally like to use the Kodak Vision 3. This is also the film I used in most of my short film. And then let's go into print, and this is where the magic happens. So if I go to profile and select Kodak 2383 and enable this, now we can already see a huge difference in our image. If I now turn off Dehancer and turn it on again, this is how the image already looks like right now. Not too bad for now. So generally I use the Kodak 2383 or the Fujifilm print film. Those are the two which I like. But for this one, let's go with the 2383. And now what I want to do is go into Film Developer, enable this, and add a little bit of saturation into my image. About here. And then I'm gonna enable my film compression, which is sort of compressing the highlights in our image and makes it more look like film. And in expand, if you enable this, you can actually adjust your black points here, but generally I just leave it like that. In our print, what I like to do is to add a lot of color density. And now all the color of the image start to come out. Let's check a quick before and after. And the image already looks super nice. And next, what I like to do is to add a little bit of film grain. Let's enable that. This is a little bit too much for me. I like to keep it subtle and use just 65mm ISO 50. So let's enable that, disable that so that you can see it better. I like to keep my film grain subtle. Next, I usually add halation. So let's enable that. Now we can see those red outlines here in my image. Let's zoom in there a little bit. So if I turn it off and turn it on, and I like it this way, very subtle. Because if I use like an 8mm right now, this would be way too much already for me. So I like to keep it subtle, keep it at 35. And you can also actually enable the mask mode so you could see where it affects your image. So if I go back to the 8mm, you can see all the parts of the images that it affects. But I like to use the 35mm or maybe even the 35mm no remjet. Let's check that. Yeah, that looks nice. So if I turn it off, turn it on, now we have some nice little halation on our image. Next, I like to add a lot of bloom to my image. So it gives this sort of glow to your image. And also, you can also see here where it affects the image if you press the mask mode. And I generally use the 35mm profile or the 65mm profile. And for this image, turn it up a little bit. I like to use the 65mm profile and turn it around to 70. Turn it on, turn it off. That's a little bit too much, I think. Let's turn it down around 50. Yeah, gives us this nice dreamy look. And film damage, I generally don't use. Film breadth, not as well. And honestly, with this image, I'm already happy. Let's turn off our Dehancer plugin, on and off. This is the before and after. Let's do that again in full screen, before and after. And I'm pretty happy with this image, although now I think that it has a little bit too much halation. So let's turn that down a notch. Yeah, just like that. Let's play back our image. That looks super nice. And let's do a quick before and after. Before and after the Dehancer plugin. And it's magic. It looks like film. Now what I also like to do is add some sort of blur on the sides. So let's add another node here. Move this here, right? And now let's search for radial blur. Let's pull this here. That is way too much. But if I turn this down to around 250, let's type that in, around 250. We've got a nice blur around here, the sides, which really focuses on the center, on our subject. And also gives this sort of vintage feel. So if I turn this off versus on, now again in full screen, this is off and now on. Now you can see that it gives this sort of blur on the sides. But if you really want to blur out the sides and overdo it, you can do that as well. But I generally like to put it on 0.25, like that. So let's disable all the nodes again to see our initial image. So this is our shot in S-Log3, and then we converted it to Rec 709. We corrected the white balance, the exposure, and then we added the Dehancer plugin. And poof, looks so nice. And then add the blur, And now we've got a super nice image. Alright, now here we got our second clip. This is me walking towards a tree. And we also got here a second clip with me sitting under the tree. So let's start with this clip first. And again, let's add two nodes with the color space transforms. And then select input color space Sony Gamut Cine, Sony S-Log3, output color space DaVinci Wide Gamut, and output gamut DaVinci Intermediate. And for our second one, DaVinci Wide Gamut, DaVinci Intermediate, output color space Rec 709, and output gamma Rec 709A because we're on a Mac. And now that we converted our footage from S-Log to Rec 709, this looks actually quite decent already. But it looks a little bit overexposed. So let's again correct our image first by adding another two nodes. Then name this as white balance. Name the third one as exposure. This image looks a little bit warm. So I'm gonna pull down the white balance a bit. It's about there. Then for my exposure, it looks a little bit overexposed, so I'm gonna pull the gain a little bit down, and maybe my blacks a little bit, just about there. Yeah, so now we got a perfectly balanced image, and this looks decent already. And now we can add another node where we will add our Dehancer plugin. Let's label this as Dehancer, which I forgot earlier. Go to effects and search the Dehancer plugin and add it here. Again, it added all the default settings again. So what we want to do first is disable everything. Now that we're done with that, let's enable the film profile, and let's try to select a different film profile. Let's try the Kodak Portra 400 for now. That looks nice. But now the magic happens when we add our film print. Let's enable that, and let's try Kodak 2383. That looks quite good already. If we disable this, now it really gives us this vintage film look. But maybe let's try a different film profile after all. Kodak Gold. Oh, Kodak Gold looks really nice as well on this. I like the Fujicolor Pro 400H as well. Okay, let's go with the Kodak Gold. Let's try to check the before and after. Yeah, that looks pretty nice. And now, what I generally do is enable the film developer, add a little bit of color boost or saturation about here. If I disable this, you can see how it adds the saturation here in the grass, about 40, 35, I guess. And then we go into our film compression, and this will again compress the highlights. So it will compress the highlights in the skies, or the whites, which makes it look more like film. Then enable this, although I generally don't mess around with the black point or white point that much, so let's just leave that at default. And now let's try to bring in more color through the color density. I generally like to pull this up to about 70, just like that. So if I undo that, you can see the change of color here in the grass and in the trees as well. So it's really subtle, but color grading is really all about subtlety. And now we can add back some film grain. Again, I generally like to keep it subtle by using the 65mm ISO 50. And then we can also add some halation. This actually looks quite nice already with the 35. Before, after. This looks quite decent already. And then let's add some bloom or glow to make it more dreamy. So let's try the 65, pull it up a little bit. You can also use the mask mode to see which part of the image it affects. Then I'll leave film damage, film breath, gate weave. I don't need those. And actually, we've got a quite good image already. It does look a little bit overexposed right now. It does look a little bit bright for my taste. So we can go here to the top and play with the exposure compensation around 0.468. Yeah, that should be about it. So let's check this. That looks pretty nice. And again, what I like to do is to add a radial blur again. So let's create a new node, search for radial blur, add that. And that is too much radial blur, as you can see. So let's turn that down to 0.25. And as you can see, it really gives that blur here on the side and focuses our eye on the center of the image. Maybe 2.5 is a little bit too much because it also blurs me in the image. Maybe let's turn it down to 0.2. Let's do a quick before and after. So this is without radial blur. As you can see here, everything is sharp. And with the radial blur, it actually blurs this side of the image. And it gives this really dreamy film look. And this is our finished image, before and after. And it really gives this nice vintage or film look. So let's turn it all off again. So first off, we started with our flat image, converted into Rec 709 to our color space transform. Then we color corrected our image like this. And then we added our Dehancer plugin, which gives it that really nice film look, and our radial blur, finish things off. And now what we can do is just copy paste our color grade from our first image to our second image right here. So Command C, Command V, and here we almost got a good image already, except that it's a little bit underexposed. So let's reset our exposure node here right now and turn that up a little bit, just like that. And I always want to kind of keep in mind to keep the images similar, especially if they are in the same scene. So if we now compare the two, you can see that this image is a bit flatter than this one, which is more saturated. And this one is actually a little bit brighter as well. So let's turn the mids a little bit down, turn the blacks a little bit up to match it better to our first image. Maybe pull the gain a little bit down. It still looks a little bit more saturated on this one. So what I can do is also add another node here and remove a little bit of the saturation of the image to match it more with the first image. That's more like it. Yeah, now they're more similar. You could also actually do this within Dehancer by adjusting the saturation or color density, but this is just how I like to do it. Let's label that saturation. And here's our complete node tree. So if we turn everything off, we converted our footage from S-Log3 into Rec 709 and then color corrected it. And then we added our Dehancer plugin, removed some of the saturation, and then added some radial blur. And now let's play this sequence. Now it matches quite nice. So this is our image without Dehancer, and this is how it looks like with the Dehancer plugin. Boom! Looks super nice. Alright, so now we're here with our last image, and let's do that process all over again. I could actually copy paste the grade from our previous clips, but just to get in some practice, let's do that all over again. So again, let's create two nodes, rename this CST, add our color space transforms, input color space Sony Gamut Symmetry, S-Log3, output color space DaVinci Wide Gamut, output Gamma DaVinci Intermediate, input color space DaVinci Wide Gamut, put Gamma DaVinci Intermediate, output color space, and then our output Gamma. So here we got our Rec 709 image. And again, let's balance our image first. This image looks quite decent already, but it does look a little bit underexposed. So let's pull up our gain a bit and maybe our blacks a little bit more down. And it does look a little bit warm. Wait, let me label those first again. Here, white balance exposure. And let's go into our white balance and make that a little bit cooler. So now we got a perfectly balanced image, and again, now we can add the Dehancer plugin. And what I like about color correcting my image first is that now I can just go to my previous color grade, copy the Dehancer node, and paste it on here. And now you already got a good image because the look you've built is already all in Dehancer. Whereas in the first four nodes, we just color corrected our image. And the whole color grading process or look we've built is in the Dehancer plugin. So if I say I have another scene and I convert that scene to Rec 709 and then just color correct it, I could just technically copy paste the Dehancer node and it would already sort of dial your look in from the previous shots. But let's try to reset that again and play around with Dehancer a little bit more. So let's find Dehancer. Add it here, and again disable film grain. Yep, enable the film profile, then go to the film print, and let's try now Fujifilm 3513. This sort of gives more of a bluish look to your image, and let's try to look for another profile. So let's try to use the Kodak Vision 350D and go from there. So now we're going to our film developer, enable this and add some saturation back into the image. About 50 seems alright. And then enable the film compression to compress our highlights again. Now it looks really like film. I like that. And also add in some color density again, which really makes those colors pop or more dense. I usually add around 70 of color density. And now we could also actually play with our contrast right here, which I haven't done before. I like a little bit more contrast in this image through here. And then we can add again a little bit of film grain. 35 is way too much. 65, ISO 50. Yeah. And now we can add some halation, so you can see the red outlines right here. It's really subtle, but I like having it subtle. Maybe let's try the no remjet one. And this is already too much for my taste. You can see that's too much halation already for me. But let's try 65mm no remjet. Yeah, I like that. It's not too much. Let's make it a little bit more dreamy with the bloom or glow in DaVinci. And I think 35 is a little bit too much. I always like to keep it at 65. Maybe turn it up a notch. And now we have this nice dreamy look. So if I play this back, we got a nice dreamy look right here. So if I turn off the Dehancer plugin, and now if I turn it on, and now I notice that my skin is a little bit too saturated, so let's turn down the film developer color boost a little bit more down. I think it's a little bit too saturated right now. Maybe around 35, yeah. I like to keep it around 35 or 40 for my saturation. So this is our image without Dehancer and with the Dehancer plugin. And it really makes such a nice image. Add that radial blur again. And now we got some nice blur here in our background and really keeps our attention to the center of the image. Let's try to play that again. And it also gives this vintage lens vibe with how blurry it is at the side. And another feature of Dehancer I absolutely love are the gates or the overscan, which we can enable here. So as you can see, it will add these frames right here, which when I play back, will also move. And I generally like to use the Super 8 gate type. It really gives that nostalgic look to it. And now to sell that nostalgic effect even more, I'll add my film profile. Let's try to use Kodak Vision 50D again. And let's use the Kodak 2383 print film. That looks nice already. And now, want to add a little bit of grain to really sell that nostalgic or old film look. When I use these gates, I generally like to add the 8mm ISO 50 film grain profile or even 250 so that it really has a lot of grain and really sells that old film look. And also add that Super 8 halation, add that Super 8 bloom. And now here are where things get interesting. When I add film damage and change this to Super 8, you can also see that here, it adds that film damage which will run through your image, which sells the effect even more. You can also add film breath and gate weave, which moves around your image, I guess. But yeah, I generally add these three options only when I try to do like a nostalgic look, like this one. Again, this is how I like to color grade my videos. You don't have to do it exactly the same way as I do, but this works for me and I like how it looks. Now, what are my honest thoughts on Dehancer? I think it's a very cool and neatly designed plugin. However, if you're like me and have no idea about the different kinds of film profiles and film prints, it can get overwhelming really quick. Even the quick guide has 55 pages, and I'm not the type of guy who really likes reading manuals, but if you're curious what every function exactly does, it is well documented there. And as we all know, DaVinci has also its own film emulation, where you can add halation, bloom, grain, and film gates without having to buy a separate plugin. What it doesn't have though is the 60+ film profiles, which is probably the selling point of Dehancer. My personal favorites are the Kodak Portras, Kodak Vision 3, Kodak Gold, and Fuji Color Pro 400H, as most of these still give a very natural look with adding that cinematic film look. Other things I like about Dehancer are the mask modes on the halation and bloom functions, where you can see how it affects your image by a click of a button. This is missing in the film look creator in DaVinci, but you would be able to achieve the same if you added the halation or glow effect in a separate separate node. Also, you have a lot more customization options with the film gate effect in Dehancer, like gate types, gate shapes, gate defocus, and even choosing whether it should be horizontal or vertical. I absolutely love this effect and I often use it in my videos, and the cool thing about it is that you can already frame your clip properly within Dehancer without having to go back to the edit tab. But let's talk about price. Dehancer costs $449 for a lifetime subscription, which is crazy, and it's actually more expensive than the studio license of DaVinci Resolve itself, which is $295. Imagine a plugin costing more than your software itself. Even the Lite version costs $199, where they removed a couple of the functions from the Pro versions. Now, after being able to try Dehancer for a month, would I actually spend $449 on this plugin? With all honesty, it would be way too expensive for me as an individual creator or for someone doing this just as a hobby. And if you think about it, most of these functions that are in Dehancer are already covered in DaVinci's Film Look Creator. So unless you're a professional who does this for a living to speed up your workflow, or if you have the extra cash for it and want to try the different film profiles, I wouldn't necessarily recommend getting it. However, for me personally, I will continue using it since Dehancer was kind enough to give me a full license in exchange for this review video. And I love using it to speed up my own workflow and getting that film look on my own videos. I just wouldn't buy it with my own money. I'm sorry, Dehancer. But hey, if you're still here and want to really get Dehancer despite the price, you can use my promo code NEVS to at least get a 10% discount and save some extra money, or to buy yourself something nice. If you have any questions about Dehancer or my color grading process, please let me know in the comments below. And if you like me doing more videos like this, hit the thumbs up and leave some suggestions on videos I can make in the future. Thank you for watching, and as always, see you in the next one. Peace!